Bitcoin Leap Day Halving Facts. What are Leap Day Halving Facts? Well, they're just facts about Bitcoin halving 2024, brought to you on this wonderful Leap Day, February 29th, 2024, because of course 2024 is a leap year, in that this day of all days is added to the calendar in order to keep the calendar regular, so that every thousands of years we don't end up having snow, sunny Christmases and snowy summer vacations or something like that, right? For example, or Hanukkah when it's hot outside, right? And July 4th, Independence Day, when it's snowy outside. Now, of course, if you live in the southern hemisphere, you're used to hot days, Christmas, and cold days on July 4th, because in the southern hemisphere, well, seasons are inverted. But since, of course, about 90% of the world lives in the northern hemisphere, in terms of human population, well, the 10% of the people that live in the southern hemisphere do so at their own peril of having upside down seasons in terms of holidays and things like that. So, in any case, having the leap year day, or the leap day on the leap year, keeps the calendar regularized. And fun fact, if you didn't know, that the leap day that was added to the year 2000 would normally not have been. I know you're thinking, wait, what? Unless you know the reason for this, you're probably surprised at hearing that, because you think, well, if 1996 was a leap year, 2004 was a leap year, why wouldn't 2000 be a leap year if it's every 4 years? Well, turns out it's not a leap year on every century, right? Whenever the calendar hits a century mark, even though that number is divisible by 4, in the case of centuries, it's normally only added when that number is divisible by 400. And doing so, on the year 2000 means that the calendar was preserved, in a sense, the timing of the calendar, the regulation of the calendar was maintained for the next, whatever it is, 10,000 years or so, because they added that one day in 2000, which normally, again, they wouldn't have done. So in the year 2100, there will not be a leap year, or there shouldn't be a leap year in the year 2100, in order to keep the calendar regulated, because 2100 is not evenly divisible by 400. Amazing facts. But yes, during the rest of the century, on any given century, years that are divisible, or rather, every 4 years, there's a quadrennial cycle, you have a leap year. But on century dates, it's only if that year is divisible evenly by 400. So, on that note, I want to first of all wish a happy birthday to all the leap year babies who only age a quarter as much as the rest of us. And happy birthday to all of you. To all my friends who are leap year babies, you know who you are. I know who you are. Happy birthday, and may you have a wonderful, wonderful year. May this be your best orbit around the sun so far, and may they keep and get better and better for you and yours. Alright, now, so, halving facts, or rather Bitcoin halving facts, brought to you on this leap year day. Why am I bringing it to you on this leap year day? Well, first of all, because it's fun. Second of all, because of the auspicious or inauspicious, because of the unusual nature. So which word is it? Because of the unusual nature, you know your words, that happens to be the years of the halving. So far, because Bitcoin was created towards the end of 2008, right? White paper was published October 31st, November 1st, depending what time zone it was released, of 2008. So Halloween or November 1st, either one of those days, depending which time zone it was published in. And that was a leap year. And within a few months, the actual network went live. Right? And if you know, we just celebrated the 15th year since the network went live back in January of 2024, which means it went live effectively for the public to be able to mine it and use it in January, on the 12th of January 2004, when Satoshi Nakamoto sent the first transaction of Bitcoin to Hal Finney, the first human-to-human, peer-to-peer transaction. Now, again, like I've always said, well, the actual first transaction of Bitcoin was when the blockchain rewarded Satoshi the first 50 Bitcoin for mining the first block, right? That was actually the first transaction in that sense, right? You earned the first 50 Bitcoin reward. And slowly but surely, more and more miners were added, and Bitcoin started to get spread around to different miners who were solving blocks. And lo and behold, here we are 15 years later, and what has happened? Well, there has been a Bitcoin halving every 4 years since its inception, roughly, right? Well, what does that mean? That means that the first Bitcoin halving, right, happened about 4 years after it was launched, and again, around the leap year. The second halving happened again in 2016, another leap year. The third Bitcoin halving happened in 2020. That's right, and again, another leap year. And now we are at the fourth of 2024, at least that's what is estimated to happen. And of course, 2024 is a leap year, right? And today is the leap day. So, what does that mean? Is it a coincidence that there are always Bitcoin halvings on leap years? Well, technically, yes, it's a coincidence. Call it randomness if you want. Geometric Brownian motion. It just so happens that so far, the halvings have occurred roughly every 4 years on leap years. Why is that interesting? Well, it's interesting because it means so far the rate of solving blocks has been well maintained by the SHA-256 algorithm, which maintains the Bitcoin blockchain. If you don't know what that is, well, you can look that up, and you'll know that that is the algorithm type which miners are working on solving questions about in order to find the answer to the next block to be mined in order to earn the Bitcoin reward for that block. But what does that mean? Well, when Bitcoin first started, a miner would earn 50 Bitcoin. If you earned 50 Bitcoin back then, it was, at the very beginning, it was worth nothing financially. Couldn't trade it anywhere, but it was worth whatever you could trade it with other people. It was very little, so 50 Bitcoin would go, for less than $1 the goods practically. But if you had, thousands of them stacked up over the first year, or hundreds of them or whatever, you could get, a few things, a computer fan or whatever, like a pen or anything really cheap, if somebody else was willing to send you that material equivalent for Bitcoins. And of course, over the years, if you had saved 50 Bitcoin that you mined back then, which was relatively easy to do, considering that there were very few people mining in 2009, and you just held on to them, today they'd be worth, those 50 Bitcoin would be worth more than $2 million, right? $2.5 million or so, more. Right, what's 50 times about 60 grand? Well, that's about $3 million, right? So if you had been, if you just held on to, if you had just held on to your 50 Bitcoin that you mined in 2009, 2010, whatever, or 2011, or 2012 before the halving, then you would have had, and never sold it, never touched it, forgot it existed, you'd now be sitting on $3 million worth of Bitcoin for just having solved one block back in those days. Kind of amazing. Well, what happened in 2012? Well, the Bitcoin halving was cut, and literally it's in the name, the halving, right? Meaning half. Okay? So it's cut in half. So instead of getting 50 Bitcoin by 2012 when the halving happened, you got 25 Bitcoin. And that is a massive supply shock. However, there were still many millions of Bitcoins, relatively, to be mined. And so Bitcoin was, yes, less than 50, but still, it was a nice amount, a very nice amount. And even today, 25 Bitcoin at 60 grand a piece puts you comfortably in a nice financial position if you, compared to having no money, for example, right? If 25 Bitcoin at 60 grand a piece, you got well over $1 million, right? And 20 and 50K would be $1 million. So 25 at 60, is whatever, 1.5, 1.8 million, something like that, 1.2 million, whatever it is. A nice amount, about $1.5 million. Very nice. Right, so about half, 3 million, yeah, 1.5 million. In any case, that would have been, $1.5 million worth of Bitcoin for every block you had mined between 2012 and 2016 in that period, when you were earning 25 Bitcoin per block as a mining reward. And then 2016 happened, and of course what happened? Well, the halving happened again. So instead of getting paid 25 Bitcoin, the reward for mining a Bitcoin block was cut from 25 Bitcoin to 12.5 Bitcoin. Wait, what? You can do fractions of a Bitcoin? Well, obviously. You can do fractions of a Bitcoin, right? You can cut them down to incredibly small units, right? Even far smaller, technically, than one Satoshi. Right? You can cut Satoshis into pieces, into millions and billions and trillions of pieces. It's all just math. So 12.5 Bitcoin was the reward during the third period, after the second halving of Bitcoin, right? So the third 4-year period of Bitcoin's existence, right? And so from 2016 to 2020, people mining Bitcoin were earning 12.5 Bitcoins per block solved, which again, was actually a nice chunk of change already back then, when it was already in the thousands of dollars. And in 2016, it was running up, from the lows of a few $100 all the way up to like 20 grand by the end of 2017. So there was a period there of pretty insane wealth being generated by Bitcoin miners, as well as obviously by traders who knew what they were doing, and money being taken from people who got wrecked, who didn't know what they were doing, and obviously money being made by people who just bought and held, and they bought early enough, and they held and they sold at or near the peak of the then all-time highs of around 20K in November 2017. And the Bitcoin miners, again, were earning 12.5 Bitcoins per block during that initial sort of massive gold rush of the period of 2016 to 2020. Right? Despite the bull run and the bear market that followed for a year and the beginning of the next bull run, and the movement all the way around 2019 and into 2020 with the whole thing that happened in March 2020 when the world kind of became very wacky for a while and everybody had to wear, masks or whatever, and all this other stuff happened. Despite all that, Bitcoin just kept chugging along, and miners kept earning 12.5 Bitcoins per block. And then May 2020 happened, and what happened in May 2020, another leap year. That's right, another Bitcoin halving happened. And instead of getting 12.5 Bitcoin per block solved, miners were then getting 6.25 Bitcoin per block solved as of the halving, the third halving in May 2020, which began the fourth 4-year cycle of halvings on Bitcoin. Now, does it have to be a 4-year cycle? Well, theoretically, no. If computer hash power increased dramatically and was able to actually crush the algorithm, even temporarily, and solve a massive amount of blocks, right? Because the halvings are over a predetermined amount of blocks. So, yes, it's theoretically possible that computer power could increase so dramatically that it would push up the next halving date to a year prior than a leap year, for example. And if you consider the fact that, for example, the last halving was in May of 2020, and this year in 2024, the next halving is going to be estimated to be in April. What does that mean? That means that it's been pushed up by a month. Does that mean that another 4 halvings from now, it might just normally, without increasing computer power massively, just staying on course with how it increases now, that we might get to see a halving happen, within less than 4 years, like 3.5 years or 3 years, such that then, there'll be a halving every 3 years, every 3.5, whatever it is. Yeah, it's entirely possible, right? All depends on the hash rate. And one of the things about Bitcoin is if the mining becomes relatively easy, right? If the computers are generating blocks really quickly, too quickly for the protocol to be comfortable with the generation speed, then it increases the difficulty of the mining. How does it do that? It makes the questions that need to be solved harder to solve. And when it does that, then you get a longer time period between the blocks being solved. And that is how Bitcoin regulates the speed of mining, by maintaining a regulated difficulty level on the mining. So yes, miners kind of randomly solve the puzzles that they're solving, or the questions that they're answering, in order to earn the reward, but it is the computer power that helps those miners solve that problem, and it's the mathematical protocol and the self-regulatory capability of the Bitcoin blockchain to be able to maintain an even keel, roughly, so to speak. So if the computer power gets too quick for the Bitcoin blockchain, difficulty increases, and then the regulation is self-imposed, takes place, and it slows down the speed of mining. Nevertheless, it's still entirely possible that given the delta between mining power and the Bitcoin protocols and the natural amount of Bitcoins that are being mined every day, week, month, year, that we will see at some point, maybe within several mining halvings from now, we will see Bitcoin have a halving in far less than 4 years, and it could be, in fact, that it will not happen on a leap year at some point in the future, right? At least for a while. And then eventually it might cycle back to a leap year after many more iterations, but because it's like another 120 years worth of mining to do on the remaining, couple million Bitcoin that exist to be mined. So what's happening this year? Well, in April 2024, the halving is going to be reduced to 3.125 Bitcoin per block reward. And you might think to yourself, well, that's a whole lot less than the 50 that the original miners got. Yeah, but the original miners were pioneers. And so they got fat rewards for being early adopters. And those who sat on their duff and didn't get into it till late, they get less. And if they're just starting now, they get 3.125, and everybody gets 3.125. It's not like the early adopters are still getting 50. They're just getting 3.125 like everyone else, right? But that 3.125 is worth significantly more than the 50 was worth 12, 15 years ago, right? So now 3.125 is worth well over 180 grand. And who knows how much it'll be worth by the time 4 years from now happens, when the next halving takes place, right? And when that happens, then you'll have the actual coin cut in terms of halving rewards, Bitcoin rewards. The halving will reduce that reward from 3.125 down to 1.65, something like that. 1.625, anyway, whatever it is, half of 3.125. When that happens, you'll have one more block reward halving period, where the amount will be over 1 BC, when it'll be about, that'll be it, right? The 1.6, whatever, that'll be the last time that it is worth more than 1 BTC for every block rewarded. After that, come 2032, right, in 2024, they'll be worth 3.125. In 2028, they'll start to be worth 1.6 whatever. And then in 2032, they'll be less than 1. And once they're less worth than 1, you will see a massive FOMO rush the way it has never been seen before, in all likelihood, according to the probabilities, because miners will be literally earning less than 1 Bitcoin per solve from there until there are no more Bitcoins to mine about 100 years later. Why does that matter? Well, it matters because it means that there won't be any more crazy amounts of Bitcoin to get from rewards. And so whenever there is a halving event, it'll be for less and less amounts, and people will be basically scrambling for Satoshis. And so if you think now of 1 BTC is high at around 60K, well, what you don't know, or maybe you do, but you haven't maybe thought it through fully, is that it is going to probably increase dramatically within the next 10 years, and increasingly thereafter. Why? Well, because the VEPs indicate as much. What do I mean by that? Well, yes, even though the asset is 15 years old, and even though mining is based on computer power and not on price action, that's arguable because you can say that, well, people enter mining because of the price action, or the returns really, because they don't enter the price. Right? The investors look at the potential ROI, and that is what they consider when they decide whether or not to invest money into Bitcoin. Well, what you have is an increasing amount of desire to have Bitcoin, even though there is a decreasing amount of supply available. Right? And that supply will be ever decreasing in terms of the circulating supply, partly because of loss, which has already affected a significant amount of it. I mean, about a quarter of all the Bitcoin that's ever been mined and ever will be mined, maybe a fifth, whatever it is, it's several million Bitcoin, right, have been lost to time and are unlikely to ever be recoverable. And I know that sounds crazy. Wait, several million Bitcoin? Well, yeah, first of all, Satoshi's wallets are well over 1 million Bitcoin. Hal Finney's wallets are who knows how many, a lot. Some of his wallets are inaccessible, theoretically. Satoshi's, nobody knows what happened to them either, because nobody knows what happened to Satoshi. And for all we know, Satoshi's gone. And there are no more Bitcoins available from that huge chunk of more than 1 million Bitcoins he had. So that's 1 million. Plus you've had like 3 or 4 million other Bitcoins from people who've lost their seed phrases, their whatever, recovery keys, their hard drives got jammed up, didn't have a backup. Who knows, maybe they lost their wallets, whatever. It's happened. But a lot of it was happening before, obviously. Bitcoin was worth 20K and above. And, so once that crazy bull run was happening, once people saw that Bitcoin was consistently staying over $1,000, of course, people who were buying it were more careful with their assets. We've seen some reduction in the loss, but we still see losses, and we still see to this day people losing their coins and things, people sending Satoshis to the wrong address, or into the void somewhere, or into a dead wallet that nobody has access to, and the money's gone, effectively inaccessible, right? And what is that? It doesn't mean that the Bitcoin doesn't exist. It still exists. It's just inaccessible. And what does that do? It basically means that the Bitcoin that's lost is increasing the value of the rest of all the other Bitcoins that still exist. Why? Well, because there's still a demand for the remainder of the Bitcoin, right? If there was no demand for it, who cares? If it's an asset nobody cares about, if there's any price action based on the volatility, it didn't have any returns, if it wasn't, doubling in value every 4 years or whatever the number is, then wouldn't make a difference, right? It's more than doubling in value, by the way, every 4 years, but it's it's just an example. Right? So because it still has a demand, and because the supply is reducing, it's basic laws of economics. I mean, literally, Econ 101, they teach you the law of supply and demand, right? And price elasticity and all that stuff. When you learn the law of supply and demand, you understand that if you have a product and there's a demand for it, a price on the market will be found. And if the supply increases massively, meaning there's tons of it available, then the price will drop because the people selling it want to sell more of it, and people want to buy it, but there's so much more they can't. They have more than they need. So people selling it are like, come on, I'll sell it to you for even cheaper. Just buy some. Natural. Well, when the supply drops and the demand is maintained, then the price will naturally go up because there's less available, but there's still the same demand. So people are willing to pay more for it. And if the supply drops and the demand increases, then the price is going to increase even more. Right? That's the ask and bid. It's delta spread, right? And that's the buy and sell prices, right? Which again are following the volatility and everything. And so what that tells you is that the return on investment matters a lot on the law of supply and demand and volatility correlation. Right? That's what determines the price action that leads to prices going up or down. So why am I saying this about the supply and demand of Bitcoin when I'm talking about the Bitcoin halving? Well, because what is the Bitcoin halving? What? Roughly? הגדול הראשון אחרי שתסתובבו פה. בבקשה. Alright. So, yeah, okay, funny. This will end up not being I don't know if anybody's watching this, I guess not. No, who knows, doesn't really matter if you are or not. Maybe you'll see this at some point in the future, maybe not. Bitcoin video. Back in the day. If you look at the Bitcoin history archives, maybe you'll stumble into this video. Right? It's a Bitcoin OG talking to you about the Bitcoin halving on a leap year day. So again, why am I talking to you about the Bitcoin halving relative to supply and demand? What's it have to do? Well, again, what is the halving? It is a dramatic 50% cut in the supply. Think about that. That's a massive, massive cut in the supply. And when you consider that already more than like 90% of all potential Bitcoin ever has already been mined, and you know, a fifth of it, let's just say, has been lost forever. Okay, and there's only like less than a couple million left to be mined in the next 120 years or so until they're done mining them. It basically means for all the miners in the world, there are millions and millions of mining devices. Right? Most of them will never mine a Bitcoin. People who own them tend not to own one, especially these days. They tend to own many units, so that collectively they can mine a Bitcoin with their computer power all added up. They may never actually mine a Bitcoin. It's kind of possible that people invest hundreds of millions of dollars in mining equipment and never solve a block. That's entirely possible. It's unlikely, but it is possible. And it's also possible that somebody with just a single computer mining a Bitcoin will be the reward winner and, you know, just make bank, right, and get a few Bitcoin for his efforts. Right? It's efforts. But again, it's fully random, and the probabilities are the more tickets you own, when you play the lottery, the more tickets you own, the higher your probability is of winning, just because of randomness and statistics, right? And probabilities. So people who have thousands of miners, or tens of thousands or more, are more likely to win rewards for mining blocks than people who have a very, very small number of Bitcoin miners. And that is exactly why people mine other cryptocurrencies, because they have a higher chance of winning those cryptos rewards, if they are mineable cryptos, than they are of winning Bitcoins, which are extremely limited in supply now in terms of what's available to be mined. And so therefore, it is preferable for miners to also mine other cryptos and not just Bitcoin, because that way they can at least get, even if they're worth far less at the moment, they can get in on mining cheaper coins and get the rewards for those, and hopefully see Bitcoin. So what you see is a massive creation of the law of supply and demand affecting Bitcoin mining, and ultimately the returns on Bitcoin, and ultimately the price of Bitcoin. So keep that in mind. And yeah, happy Bitcoining, happy leap day, happy leap year, happy halving. May the Satoshis be with you. Cheers.